There is a very common opinion that the first Final Fantasy you ever played will most likely be one of your all-time favourites forever. Sure, it's not always the case 100% of the time, but it is a big reason why games such as Final Fantasy VI up until Final Fantasy X remain so beloved by a huge chunk of the fanbase to this day. Not only are those games filled with nostalgia bringing back nothing but good memories, but it was also the very first time they got to immerse themselves within a Final Fantasy world, characters and story. Those memories just aren't something we can easily forget. Sometimes it might just be a tiny small section of the game, but regardless, that first experience creates a core memory for life. That's why I believe it is so crucial to be able to experience these games once again after many years, whether that is through ports or sometimes for lucky remakes or remasters. And in my case, when I think back all those years ago to my very first Final Fantasy at the age of 10, 3 powerful words come to mind.
Activating combat mode.
Definitely far from what many would recommend as the first entry in the series, I remember spending an unhealthy amount of time, day and night, playing Crisis Core on my PSP 2000. Yes, that is a flex. I would wake up early before school to get a few extra minutes of playtime whilst Yu-Gi-Oh! GX played in the background. Best Yu-Gi-Oh! By far, by the way, without a question. And each time I finished the game fully, I would just start again. That entire experience was a special time period of my life. When I think back on Crisis Core, I don't think of just the game, but everything that came with it. My surroundings, my friends that I would talk to about it, and how happy I was replaying the exact same game for at least a 4th time. I mean, as far as I remember, Sonic Rivals is one of the greatest games ever, along with Birth by Sleep and Ben 10 Protector of the Earth. That is the power of gaming nostalgia. It makes us dumb. And on December 13th, 2022, this idea of replaying, re-experiencing and taking a trip down memory lane became a possibility for many like myself as Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion, or just Crisis Core for short, got released worldwide on all modern consoles with highly upgraded graphics, redone voice acting and improved combat. But this time with bills and adult responsibilities, which is the reason this video took forever to come out. I apologise. Despite what some may believe, as it was released 10 years after the original, Crisis Core plays a crucial role in the story of Final Fantasy VII, but especially the character of Cloud. And with the Final Fantasy VII craze possibly being at an all-time high as Square is pushing the story in a new direction with the recent remake and Rebirth coming out this winter, the knowledge of Crisis Core will be far more crucial than it has ever been, which brings us to today. I will be looking at this most recent remake from Square Enix, analysing if it was a job well done, as well as was this remaster enough to intrigue players that never experienced or even fully heard about the story of Zack Fair. This video will contain spoilers for the game, so if you've yet to play it and want to go into it completely blind, I do highly suggest coming back to this video afterwards, but do drop a like before going because me and you both know you're not actually likely to come back. As we go on, I am interested in hearing what everyone's opinion on the game is, whether this remaster was your first time playing or if you've played the original, so make sure to let me know. But with all of that said, let's take a look at Crisis Core Reunion, a living legacy, fully remastered. First thing that has to be pointed out is unlike the Final Fantasy VII remake, Crisis Core is a one-for-one replica of the original game as far as the story goes. Everything in terms of story and writing has been kept, so no hidden secrets or endings that relate to the 7 remake can be found. This is purely Crisis Core recreated with modern technology for a fresh experience. You begin the game through the eyes of Zack Fair, a soldier second class who dreams of becoming a first, the highest ranking available within the elite fighting force of Shinra. You follow him through a training mission, learning the basics of combat where he is guided by his mentor Angel. Not Angel, that's a little bit later on. After completing the simulation, we see Zack doing some squats before being sent out for his next through assignment. A soldier first class Genesis has gone missing after being sent on a mission to Wutai. It will be Zack's job to go to Wutai and find out more details. It's also revealed Angel recommended Zack to be promoted to first, so this mission will be used as a good assessment of his skill with both Angel and the director coming along. In these opening 15 minutes or so, we get a good idea of Zack's very young and immature character. With Angel acting strict and serious, Zack is quite the opposite. Always restless and excited for the next job at hand, we see this through not just his actions and movement, but even speech and dialogue choices when talking to someone like the director. It is clear he can't wait to prove himself every opportunity he gets and come a little bit closer to achieving his end goal of becoming a hero. But what exactly does that mean? Well, for Zack, to achieve this dream, Angel is his foundation for what that should look like. Upon arriving in Wutai for their mission, we start seeing more to Angel than first meets the eye. A good mentor who takes his responsibilities as a top priority, but manages to show his more human side to those he cares for, educating Zack about what might seem like random childhood stories, but it's about what makes him the man he is, always living by his honor, even if it's not the easiest route. After clearing the mansion and defeating the final monster together with Angel, the two head back to the director shortly before being ambushed. Zack is ordered to take the director to safety first, then head back and assist Angel. However, upon arriving back where they separated, Angel is nowhere to be found, but in his place is the soldier first class hero Sephiroth, who reveals the enemy forces that attacked the group were actually copies of the missing soldier Genesis, and even makes claims that Angel has also betrayed them. With these opening acts out of the way, the story of Zack can truly begin to shape up. No longer under Angel's wing, Zack is on his own learning and experiencing the world and reality of these situations without guidance from his role model. He continues focusing on the issues surrounding the Genesis disappearance and his copies, working alongside the likes of Turks, whilst also trying to find out the truth regarding Angel. Was Sephiroth actually correct with his accusations of betrayal, or was he just paranoid? Well, just like the rest of the game and its pacing, it really doesn't take long to get the answer.
I've become a monster.
I promise you, back in the day, this scene was incredible. I would get so excited every single time just because of how cool it was. I mean, he has a wing! But now that it is no longer 2008, my anime taste has matured and I am no longer 10, it is hard to see Crisis Core the same way. As much as I love the tale of Zack Fair, his struggles and difficulties would shape him into the soldier he is by the final acts of the game, it is extremely difficult to overlook some of the dialogue the game presents, especially in the first half. That said, Crisis Core does have one of the greatest cutscenes you'll ever see in a Final Fantasy game, so it's worth, even if it's just for that, just make it to that bit and then you can stop. Going back to what I said before, with this being a 1-for-1 replica, as far as I'm aware anyways, it meant all the lines in the game remain the exact same. No changes to the script have been made, and it is oh so very obvious.
No way. He just ate my hair.
Crisis Core feels very cheesy far too often, with the constant talk about monsters, dreams, and of course, loveless. There are a few genuine cutscenes where the words monster and dreams are used every other sentence.
What do angels dream of?
Luckily, this doesn't last the entire game, and just before it does get too much, a beautiful, soft-spoken voice comes to the rescue.
Cloud.
Wait, no.
Hello?
I have a confession to make, I guess. As a Crisis Core lover, for me, Zack always was and will be the rightful owner of the Buster Sword, as well as the guy Aerith should have been with. I never loved the idea of Cloud and Aerith bonding, and I know this is very weird to talk about middle of the video, but it just felt like such a backstab in this romance anime, but that's a topic for another day. In between all the crazy battles, story reveals, and hunting down Genesis, we see a different side of Zack. One where he forms a new bond that allows him to be free from his responsibilities, even if it is for a few minutes. The Aerith and Zack moments are easily some of the best in the entire game for me, because even if they're filled with minigames and a much slower pacing that isn't everyone's cup of tea, the bond between them felt real. Zack wanting to show her the sky and the world from above, meanwhile Aerith gives him something to protect and come back to, but also not lose track of himself. Despite his cocky and flirty attitude overall, there is a softer and more vulnerable side to Zack, and it's only Aerith that manages to bring that out. Crisis Core tries to cover a lot in a short amount of time. When looking at the main story, the game can be done in about 10 hours. And of course, a huge part of this is the initial limitations of hardware on the PSP. But it is a bit of a shame the remaster couldn't expand on any of this, because far too often it feels like you are jumping to the next scenario without a proper closure to the one before. As a whole, the game just keeps changing ideas of what to focus on as its main objective, leading to a lot of rushed moments. And whilst this isn't the end of the world, because we know a lot of the most important characters like Cloud, Aerith and Sephiroth, it would have been nice to see more controlled and paced interactions. By the end of the game, we see just how much of an impact Zack managed to have on everyone, especially Aerith, Cloud and the Turks. But what's lacking is the in-game interactions to convince us those were genuine real bonds. Regardless, as the game proceeds, we still manage to witness and experience some of Final Fantasy VII's most iconic moments firsthand, all the way up until the final scene of Crisis Core, which as far as I believe still stands as one of the greatest endings in the Final Fantasy series. Despite its early game flaws with the writing and overall pacing issues, the second half of the story manages to fix a lot of that through Zack's development. The soldier we meet in Chapter 1 is far from the one we see by the end, and a major part of that comes with events such as becoming a first, Angel's death, a new hairstyle, Sephiroth's betrayal, and Cloud's suffering. he showcases signs of leadership and understanding, realizing what he actually stands for and what drives him to keep going, not for others or commands, but himself. It is not an easy road and he stumbles more than once throughout, but that is when the people he met and interacted with help him get back on track. Whether that is Cloud and Nibelheim, Aerith after losing Angel, or even Cisne, who in the short time together shows clear signs of comfort, which only lead to regret by the end of the game. So whilst being far from the perfect story I remember from my childhood, with awkward dialogue and writing being a common theme, I won't deny even for a second that when that final cutscene played, I simply sat back in my seat and let the emotions kick in. Zack feels more real than at any point before, and when he finally realised what his dreams and honour meant, what he wants to fight for, unfortunately he experiences the words of Angel firsthand, that living by your honour is not always the easiest path to take. So I have spent quite the amount of time talking about a story that has not changed at all, so instead let's start focusing on what makes this game here different from the Crisis Core of the past, and simply put, it is everything gameplay related. Reunion is a far superior and hugely improved game for the player experience, making the combat similar to that of the remake as well as the graphics, which aren't even close when compared side by side with the original PSP version. As far as these things go, Square Enix has absolutely nailed it. The game just feels great. From running around as Zack to finding different enemies and hearing that sound effect of the Buster Sword, it feels smooth and worthy of being called a modern game experience. The combat revolves around one main attack button with shortcuts for materia and skills of your choice. The regular attack will mostly just serve as a purpose to deal some sort of damage, whilst the commands are your source of main damage dealers, leading to a smooth and not too planned combat system that you can always adjust. The only drawback of these commands being their consumption of either the MP or SP. The stronger and more advanced the command, the bigger the consumption. These can be regained normally through items, but also depending on the player performance. After each battle, Zack will gain some sort of benefits based on how he performed. For example, finishing enemies with a magic attack will replenish MP, or completing the fight with no damage taken will provide a significant boost across the board. The game does a great and straightforward job of explaining combat and its differences from the 7 remake, which may have introduced many to the world of Final Fantasy 7. Because as similar as it might seem on the surface, with the iconic weapon and materia system still being crucial to both the abilities available but also Zack's overall powers, Crisis Core has ways to differentiate itself. From leveling up to limit breaks and summons, it is just different. The biggest, most notable and unique aspect of the combat is the digital mind wave, or simply DMW. What might seem like a random roulette in the top corner of the screen is in fact the key to all things combat related. Not only will it allow you to use a variety of limit breaks, with each one being represented by different characters, but also level up your materia, gain different buffs in battle, or even level up Zack himself. All of this is decided based on the image and numbers that line up. Starting with the numbers, there is a ton of different combos with each one meaning something different, whether that is no MP cost, critical damage, or the good old 777 meaning a level up for Zack. Then on top of that, if 3 images of a character line up, Zack will be able to use a limit break relating to that individual. Some of these are more simple, for example Sephiroth's damages one enemy with multiple slash attacks. Meanwhile, Aerith's limit break makes Zack invincible for a few seconds and restores all of his stats back to 100 if not more. All of these also have a star rating attached to them which influences the strength of the outcome. This same method is also used for summonings, which work the same way as the limit breaks, but with one major difference. These right here offer some of the most stunning visuals we have ever seen in a Final Fantasy. I would argue these are the best cinematics for a summon related attack we have ever seen. All of them being pre-rendered cutscenes, they are visually stunning. Not being too long or too short, they nail the sensation of understanding the power behind each one of these attacks. You find yourself unlocking most of these DMWs throughout the story, especially the character related ones, but some may require you to complete missions or mini side stories throughout. And speaking of missions, there's a lot of them. 300 to be exact. It's clear these were made for the PSP back in the day, short and snappy, mostly taking about 5 minutes to complete. These really were perfect for a quick pick up and play session, which I guess makes it more enjoyable on something like the Switch or the Steam Deck rather than a PlayStation where you have to sit down. Most of these are fairly repetitive. You spawn in, go to the location on your map, defeat the enemy, and you're done. These do have occasional mini stories going alongside, such as Yuffie's treasure hunts or Hojo's experiments, but it can barely even be called a mini story with how bland it feels. So whilst they are a good way to kill time or level up, I would not recommend leaving them for the late game, especially not the low star ones, because they become annoyingly far too easy by the end. You'll be spending more time in loading screens than actual fights. All that said, even if you're not a completionist, these can be decently addicting. Plus they provide some higher end rewards like new summons, materia, best gear and so on, which are an absolute must have for anyone trying to play the game on the hard difficulty. The jump from casual to hard mode is huge. In fact, it's a little bit stunning. It might not seem that way at the start, but by the end some of the bosses get a power up of a lifetime. Best example is the final boss itself. If my research is correct, when playing on casual, the HP of the final boss is about 400,000. A respectable amount, don't get me wrong. But then comes the hard difficulty, which multiplies that by nearly 6. A grand total of 2,232,000 life points. That's of course on top of the attacks being far more powerful. So whilst I did the hard difficulty from the start, I would highly advise saving it for a second playthrough. Outside of all the combat stuff, there are some things to do and people to talk to separate from the story and missions, from helping fan clubs to solving mysteries with some random kid and some weird, most certainly outdated, minigames. These aren't anything impressive or thrilling by most standards, but they at least prevent a tunnel vision of a playthrough. One chapter has you cutting bombs in half, whilst another will be a snowy stealth mission in which you have to squat to stay warm. Honestly, Zach just loves to work on a glutes. You can also spend hours in the materia fusion menu, combining different materia you have gathered and leveled up to try and add even more powerful movesets to your arsenal. Whilst everyone has a different playstyle and might not do half the things Crisis Core has to offer, one thing is guaranteed for everyone, and that is the company of a great soundtrack. Crisis Core has some incredible tracks, heavily focusing on guitar and piano. These are just full of emotion that mixed with the right cutscene can become drilled into your head for weeks. Honestly, I don't think I've ever heard a piano go this hard. Square Enix clearly wants people to play this game to fully understand the events that will take place in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It's been made clear both in interviews as well as the remake itself that Zack will play a far greater role in the story to come. And by choosing to keep the story of Crisis Core the exact same as it goes along with their plans for the remake, they really outdid themselves in making gameplay as appealing as possible, to which I say they pretty much nailed everything they could for a remaster. But some issues, unfortunately, clearly still remain. Whilst it is easy to focus on all the good stuff Reunion has to offer, there are definitely flaws to its original game design. Despite the graphics and the visuals being heavily smoothed out, the level design of Reunion is still the exact same as the original, splitting the world into mini sections with multiple entry and exit points. There isn't much exploration offered to the player either, as all shops can be found in the main menu, and the NPCs walking around are limited to about 7 different models. It's honestly not uncommon for you to find 2 NPCs that look the exact same within a walking distance from one another. All these areas have exit points that lead to the next section, and each one means a new loading screen. Whilst this might sound like nitpicking, it is fair to point out some locations become tedious when you're walking back and forth, especially during the story. There isn't any fast travel options either, so on some occasions you have to go through 5 mini sections just for a bit of dialogue telling you to go back. I mentioned earlier the different types of minigames, which makes it a shame because there is no chapter selection. Crisis Core has a lot of moments that are specific to one chapter, and the only way to re-experience it would be loading back an old save, which you might just not happen to have, or starting a new game from scratch, which is far from ideal. As for the areas where you'll be doing the fighting, despite the enemies not being visible to you before the fight begins, you can guess where they are about 99% of the time. If a narrow road suddenly has a bit more width to it or a sharp turn, enemies are pretty much guaranteed to pop up every single time. But no need to fear, in case you don't want to fight every single enemy in front of you, it doesn't take long to realise a certain little trick has been kept since the original game. If you always run against the edge of the map, the chances of combat taking place are pretty much close to none. Somehow sticking to the side of any area puts you right outside the combat range, so you can speedrun most locations if you wanted to. I'll be first to admit, I did this for multiple missions, but come on, there's like 300 of them. Understandably, if this was a brand new game, then these issues would be far bigger than they actually are. But these are just some drawbacks of keeping a heavy amount of the game design the same as the original, which was designed for a far weaker console. So far, I would say I have been fairly positive, even when discussing things that clearly aren't perfect about the game, and I do plan to keep the same energy for the rest of the video. But I have to say, if there is one area of the game I wish could have been better, it is the voice acting. And no, this is not me just bashing on Zack's new voice actor alone, this applies to others as well. But as the leading man who shows up for nearly every single cutscene, his performance is most notable. Characters like Sephiroth, Aerith and Cloud have all proven themselves in the remake already. We know what they're capable of, but I have yet to hear Zack in a way that makes me feel impressed. There is absolutely nothing wrong about having a new voice actor. It happens all the time, and new characters like Angel and Genesis sound amazing, embracing the characters and really selling a strong performance despite quite a limited script. But it is crucial to have the voice actors sound at least somewhat similar to the past in order to make that transition smoother. And in the case of Zack, it's like a completely different character both in the voice and delivery. There is still a lot of time for the new voice actor to merge with the character if Zack does play as big of a role as is being implied, and I'm honestly rooting for it because I love Zack the character. With the next game being Rebirth, it also means the dialogue will be designed for the current voice actor, rather than him having to recreate a performance done by someone else 15 years ago. Now, for all that it's worth, I do have to admit he did sound a little bit better at the end of the intermission DLC, but until Rebirth comes out and we hear more, as it is right now, the old voice actor is still far superior in my eyes. As for the rest of the game, in the original a lot of dialogue was without sound, to the point that even Tifa had no voice actor. You would simply read the text and move on, but Reunion has now added in voice acting for nearly all of these scenes, and whilst it might seem like a good move on the surface, it ended up being the complete opposite. Sometimes we don't really realise how bad or weird certain things might sound until we actually hear them said aloud, making them suddenly stick out and be difficult to ignore. A lot of dialogue seems badly directed, filled with awkward pauses and unconvincing delivery of emotional moments like anger or sadness, often making them sound like it's just someone reading out loud to themselves rather than being in a conversation with the person in front. Not to add, most of the children voice actors are abysmal, making it hard to tell if these are actually children or grown-up adults pretending to be 6. Regardless, it's bad. If these were the original lines, it would be expected because voice acting 15 years ago for a PSP game wasn't exactly Game Awards worthy, but these are recent audio recordings from the new voice actors of today, who most certainly could have added a bit more identity to these characters. Before Crisis Core Reunion came out, Crisis Core was my second favourite Final Fantasy of all time, barely behind Final Fantasy X. Now that it is no longer driven by nostalgia and I have re-experienced the game as an adult with a more critical viewpoint, I unfortunately can't say the same thing about the game any longer. But that means absolutely nothing as far as how incredible of a job Square Enix have managed to do with this remaster. When I think of what a remaster should be, Reunion is at the top of that list. It's not changing too much to feel like a different game, and it doesn't cut corners in the areas it actually set out to improve. Whilst far from a perfect game with its issues of pacing, very limited areas to explore, and a hit or miss voice acting depending on the character, Reunion sees great improvement in the one area it set out to refine: its gameplay, enhancing it for current consoles and becoming more appealing for newcomers to the world of Final Fantasy VII. With it being a one-for-one replica of the original, we shouldn't be expecting much more upgrades outside the combat. But it's okay to say a few more cutscenes and conversations with characters like Cisne or Cloud could have gone a long way, creating a more realistic and believable connection between them and the player. Regardless, its 10 or so hour story may be very straightforward without much hidden meaning, but it still manages to have moments of interesting lore, character development for Zack himself, and emotional scenes that will remain with the player long after they are done playing. It's undeniable Square Enix really wanted to show love to this project and have it look acceptable for today's standards. It seems they actually know how important this game is to the future of Final Fantasy VII projects, so there was no room for error. When I was done with Crisis Core, I felt happy. Not only because I replayed one of my all-time favourite games, but because I felt the remake did justice to my childhood memories, making the game look the way I imagined it back in the day. Except this time leaving me excited to pick up Zack and Cloud's story in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Thank you everyone for checking out the video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and let me know what you thought of Crisis Core in the comments. Have you played the original, or was this your first time playing the game? If you enjoy content like this, then I recommend maybe checking out some other videos here on the channel, and if you really enjoyed it, then a like on this video would go a long way with reaching a new audience, and I honestly really appreciate that. We honestly have a big year ahead with Final Fantasy 16 coming out in the summer, which I will definitely cover, but also content wise you can expect videos on titles like Final Fantasy 12 as well as Persona 3. Hopefully both of those videos will come out before Final Fantasy Fantasy 16, because as soon as that's out, that's like 3 months of my life just gone. If you're still here, just know I appreciate you, and I wish you a great day. I'll hopefully catch you in the next video. Stay safe, stay good, and thanks. I'm out.